Good morning. Good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, dear honorable guest. It is my great pleasure to welcome you in the next session. I hope you are enjoying the very first regional MENA Housing Forum. And I'm today here with you as the host. My name is Tomas Kelley. I work with Habitat for Humanity International out of the Europe Middle East regional office as the Associate Director of Partnerships. I'm very pleased to be here with our expert panelist and moderate the session titled "The Role of Private Sector in Affordable and Resilient Housing," where we will be discussing the trends and the opportunities and the current practices of the public-private partnerships, the so-called PPPs, and as we in Habitat, we also try to add the fourth P, representing the people, the beneficiaries, the recipients of these projects. The current session, the upcoming session. We'll discuss the role of the private sector and what is the role of the private sector in providing affordable and resilient housing, whether we talk about the resiliency for the against the natural disasters, man-made disasters, and what is the role of the private sector in considering the bottom of the pyramid and the people, the poorer part of the society. Today's sessions will be structured in the following way. We will have introductory contributions by our panelists, followed by a series of questions, and we will leave a bit of a time towards the end for the questions or comments from the audience. So if you have any remarks or comments or questions, please do type them in the chat box and we will pick them up at the end. Very pleased to be here, joined by our panel experts that I will just now introduce very briefly in the order as they will do their introductory remarks. So first we will start with Olivia Nielsen, who is the principal at Miyamoto International, where she focuses on the climate resilient housing. And through her more than 10 years of experience in housing finance, housing public-private partnerships, and post-disaster reconstructions, she brings enormous knowledge and experience. We're looking forward to her remarks. After her, we will hear from the Senior Investment Officer, Mr. Jacques Blindou, who is representing the International Finance Corporation, where he's with his 20 years of international experience in advisory services, corporate finance and investments, valuation, financial analysis, to mention just a few among others. Following by Maysa, Sabah, who is the regional housing expert for the MENA region and currently the Associate Director of Urban Planning for the MENA region at AECOM's Dubai office. Maya has been leading mixed-use projects, housing projects, and served as an advisor to national and local governments on innovative housing and urban development programs throughout many countries in the MENA region. And last but not least, we will hear from my lovely colleague Puja, Sawhney, who is the Associate Director of People Public-Private Partnerships at Habitat for Humanity, with the main role of formulating the P4 framework and developing and establishing national and international coalitions focusing on providing affordable housing and adequate and solving the housing challenges. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Olivia to hear to the introductory comments and her presentations. Olivia, over to you.
Thank you. And if it's okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll quickly go over housing PPPs, and I'm going to focus mostly on Africa. You know, I've calculated that about 41 out of 54 African countries have promised large-scale housing projects over the past few years. And these are projects that are typically over 10,000 units. And you see this a lot in the media, big announcements from the government. And housing PPPs are often identified as this panacea solution to help overcome all our housing issues. but so often they fail. I have examples from around the world of how large housing projects announced, MOUs signed with developers, they're announced and then they fail, they're announced and then they fail. And it kind of happens all around the world. It is not unique to Africa. I see it in Asia as well, and sometimes in the Middle East. And why is that? PPPs are wonderful, but they're not easy to do. And I think it's important to mention this before we dive into this PPP session. PPPs require the right enabling environment. They require the right type of laws to be in place. But they also require a lot of technical work. And I think this is why Jacques' session presentation after this is very important. It requires a lot of planning before it can be implemented. It's not just a government signing a contract with a private party and the magic will automatically happen. The magic of a PPP where the assets of the government and the assets of the private sector are leveraged together to create affordable housing requires a lot of pre-planning work. And unfortunately, often fails too because the land provided is a poor location. The developer chosen doesn't have the right qualities, the right technical or financial qualities, and then the contract is poorly written. So it's really important to, and this is a photo of a housing PPP that failed. As you can see, the houses are completely abandoned. To put a lot of work in pre-planning housing PPPs, and this is something that we work a lot on. First, in choosing the right land, making sure that the land is properly picked. Creating the sense of trust in the government, ensuring that the infrastructure is also in there first. Making sure that the effective demand is there, meaning ensuring that you know that the houses will be sold, and ensuring a transparent competitive process with bidders. And then last but not least, I think it's really important to anticipate risks, all the risks that could occur between a private and a public party. And so going into this PPP session, it's important to note that these things are not easy. It can take over a year of work to prepare these partnerships. It's not a simple signing of an MOU between a government and a private party. It takes a lot of pre-planning. But once that pre-planning is done, it can be replicated over and over again. And this is where I think for MENA, it's pretty interesting because I think most countries in MENA have kind of moved beyond the basics of a housing PPP, of promoting the right enabling environment, of developing that first project. They've started to establish commercial feasibility of housing PPPs, and moving down market is kind of the third step. Once you really start to show, okay, PPPs are feasible, private parties are interested, they can work together with the government, now we can push housing down market and truly start to work, to deliver housing to the masses. But I think the fourth step, and this is the step I want to finish on, is we want to move PPPs to promote the types of cities of the future that we want to live in. This is our one opportunity to create housing at a mass scale, to create green neighborhoods from scratch. It's our one opportunity to kind of push beyond the limits and push the private sector to create the cities we want to live in. And those cities must be affordable, walkable, must include green infrastructure like nature-based solutions. They must be resilient to climate change too. And I'm thinking about it from kind of a European perspective. We designed our cities decades ago, centuries ago, and we're kind of in the process of restructuring them today. This is the same street in the Netherlands a few decades later. And so this is an opportunity for MENA to do things well. We're creating neighborhoods from scratch. Let's try to create walkable neighborhoods, green neighborhoods, things that we won't have to redo in a few decades. And I'm thinking about a project in Rwanda that I'm working on currently, where we're trying to think in that way. What is the neighborhood of the future we want to create? It must be green, it must be walkable, it must include nature-based solutions. The buildings must think about the climate, must be climate resilient, but also it must be like a friendly, kind of lively place to live, to work, to commute to. that will still be that way in decades to come. So this was just a short presentation to say a lot of countries in Africa are still trying to establish the basics of a housing PPP and move the needle on that and try to show, okay, we can build those few thousand houses, those hundreds of thousands of houses that have been promised. But then we need to start moving beyond that. We need to start pushing affordability. We need to start making the case that this can be done, but it can be done better, and that it can be done in a more resilient and sustainable way. And in this way, we can create new neighborhoods for cities that are the cities we want to live in the future. So it's now time to move beyond the basics, I think, of housing PPPs and start reaping their full benefits for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olivia. Very, very interesting point. I particularly like the comments around the green technology and considering the climate change as this pose a great risk and a great opportunity as well to create a livable city. As well as I'd like that you mentioned the other dimensions of housing and the communities, which sort of goes beyond the walls and the roofs. I think it's very important to consider the livability in the planning and how the communities will interact together and consider other cross-cutting areas like work and other aspects. Great, thank you so much. Now I will hand over the word to Jacques. Please, over to you if you want to share your screen as well. And we are very much looking forward to hear your comments about your reaction to the topic, as well as the upcoming IFC's plans around PPPs.
Okay, thank you, Thomas, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone. So let me start by sharing my screen. Do you see my screen?
Not yet.
Oh. Share screen. Okay, yes. I think now you can see it, huh?
Now it's coming up. Yes, perfect.
Okay, thanks so much. So yeah, to discuss the role of the private sector, I want to discuss, present our unit, because our role is to, the role of IFC as member of the World Bank Group, which is an institution with 5 entities, of which IFC is one of those. So the role of IFC is to promote, the private sector in countries, in member countries. And IFC does have 2 lines of businesses, investment and advisory. And my line of service belongs to advisory, PPP advisory. So it's all about private sector. So our role as PPP advisory, IFC PPP advisory, is to advise government to introduce public-private partnerships in member countries. So, and one of the sectors that we cover is also housing. So as you can see, we have been around for more than 30 years, and we are a group of more than 150 professionals. Currently, we are working on 108 mandates, and we cover different sectors, of which transportation, housing 6%, and we have mandates per geography, Latin American and Caribbean 30%, Africa 20%. MCT is Middle East, Central Asia, and Turkey, where also I think we have activities. And as we said, we are the only multilateral agency advising government to bring public-private partnerships. And as Olivia mentioned, PPPs could be lengthy and quite complex, because at the end of the day, we need to find the right partners, and we need to do proper due diligence in order to attract the private sector. We usually prefer a competitive process that ends with a tender. So the breakdown here of our mandate timeline is into 2 phases, phase 1 and phase 2. So the phase 1 is basically called due diligence and structuring, because we need to know and understand, the business that we want to put out for tender. So it starts with signing a mandate with the government. This is what Olivia calls MOU. And after that, PPP is quite specialized. So we need to also gather a team of consultants, specialized consultants. We as IFC, we do have the financial expertise. We also have in-house expertise, but given that the sectors are quite like specific and also complex, so the team is supported by external consultants. So during the phase one, that could last up to 8 months, depending on the complexity of the transaction. So we do due diligence, which covers legal, technical, environmental, sometimes communication also. And at the end of that phase, we come up with what we call a transaction structuring report that really like lays out, you know, the risk allocation between the public and the private. In a PPP, proper risk allocation is very important. It comes, of course, after, you know, ensuring commercial feasibility, technical also feasibility, all these things. And at the end of that phase, we require approval from the government to move to the phase two. And the phase two is the tender implementation. During that phase, what we basically do is to go to market, we market the project, and we also pre-select bidders with whom we have discussions until we agree on, you know, the detail of the contract before the RFP, request for proposal. And this is the structure of the team. As you can see, the government is the client, IFC as lead transaction advisor. We work with the team that I just described here. So this is basically what our role consists in. I'm going fast so that we can, you know, have time for further discussion. And currently we are working on a couple of transactions. So we have the affordable housing in Djibouti that could be of interest to some of the investors and some of people in that meeting here. So in Djibouti, the plan is to have between 1,500 and 2,000 housing units. We also have projects in Kenya that are ongoing, Togo, Fiji, India, and Timor-Leste. And in process of, you know, being signed, we have some student accommodation projects in Malawi and Nigeria. Malawi is 15,000 beds in 3 universities, Nigeria, 8,000 beds in 2 universities. And we have completed projects in India and also in Kenya. And I think Olivia mentioned some things. We will discuss them in detail, much more details, like how do we make PPP work. In India, we use what we call cross-subsidization, so that, you know, the upper segment could subsidize the lower segment. And I wanted to insist on the Djibouti affordable housing, which Olivia and I are working on. The idea for us is also to present that here and also have, you know, give you an idea of the structure that is being contemplated. So in Djibouti, we have 2 segments that are being targeted under the same PPP. So the affordable housing segment and the medium scale segment. So the idea is for one segment to cross-subsidize the other, and doing all these under the law of the country. So this is a good idea for us also to go out and try to test the structure that is being contemplated. And I will finish here, I think, by why do we need PPP, the role of the private sector. So the private sector, as you mostly know, they can bring efficiency, speed of delivery, know-how, innovation, they can mobilize capital. And also, you know, the private sector can take some risks that the government cannot take. And the last one, I think we will discuss that, because Olivia mentioned that why some PPP fail, some do not work. Because sometimes also, if you don't have the right target, you know, it will not work if you are like dealing with an affordable housing PPP. So I will stop now and yeah, over to Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacques. Appreciate it. Very interesting to hear about the process, but also the upcoming initiatives. And we at Habitat are glad to see that there is a focus and an effort around housing and affordable housing, with the current housing deficit and the climate-related issues and the rapid urbanizations around the world. I think it's only very clear that we need to have the different kinds of stakeholders being involved in the process, from the governments through the private sector, as well as the non-governmental organizations and many other types of stakeholders. Thank you so much. Now I'm glad to pass the word over to Maysa to share a little bit of her view on the topic and her experience working directly in a number of the countries of the MENA region. I think that's a very tailored to the audience today.
Okay, let me Share. Oops, okay, sorry. 1 second, sorry, I don't use Zoom a lot, so. Can you see my screen?
We can,
Yes,
but
we
we are
can.
now we can see the presentation.
Okay, all right. Oh, but now you can see all sorts of things as well, I think. Yeah, okay.
No, it's good. Now we're good.
Yeah, now it's good?
It's good, yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay, hello, everyone. Let me just again introduce myself. My name is Maysa Sabah. I'm an associate director with the urban planning team for Middle East and Africa with AECOM. AECOM is a multinational engineering company. I'll talk a bit about AECOM in a second. So I am based in Dubai, which, you know, when we talk about MENA, which countries are we talking about? The Gulf is, the issues in the Gulf are different, but affordable housing is definitely a very, very important issue. And perhaps it manifests itself differently from some of the other countries that I've worked in the region, such as Egypt or Lebanon or Syria or Jordan or Morocco, Tunisia, etc. So each country has its different dynamics. So in AECOM, we typically work on relatively large projects, and recently the focus has been on KSA. Obviously, I'm in the Dubai office, so we mostly service the UAE and KSA. Even these large projects that, NEOM, some of the TODs that we are working on in Riyadh, DGDA, another big project in Riyadh, all these different projects have an affordable housing component to them. So it's definitely on top of the agenda. Now, the question is how is it being delivered and how successful is this delivery? So I'll be talking about that in a second. So prior to joining AECOM, I was with the Affordable Housing Institute. I was the managing director for this region, and we worked on different affordable housing policies and programs in different countries in the region. Sorry, I have a bit of a cold. So just briefly about AECOM. AECOM is a Fortune 500 company. It's based in the US with offices around the world across 7 continents. And we provide engineering, architecture, urban planning, urban design, landscape, cost consultancy, project management, so a whole different types of services. Even for AECOM, we have launched something called AECOM Sustainable Legacies about 2 years ago. And the goal of this is a global initiative, is to focus on sustainable development, improving social outcomes. So these are the 4 pillars of this sustainable legacy: sustainable development, improving social outcomes, achieving net zero carbon emissions, and enhancing governance. Now, affordable housing, generally, it intersects different things here, but generally it falls within this improving social outcomes piece. So it is the S in the ESG, if you like, but definitely it also is across, it's a theme that cuts across these different pillars. So moving on, I want to focus in the next few minutes. These are all general remarks that I'll be giving. But if I focus a bit on the UAE, which is where I am based. So the UAE, the affordable housing market in the UAE is split into 2. So there is housing for citizens and there is housing for non-citizens. And in terms of PPP, or this partnership between the government and the private sector, it is present very much in the UAE. So when it comes to delivering housing for citizens, the government has a direct role. It provides the land and it provides the financing in the form of low interest loans to homeowners. But the model that the UAE has been gradually shifting towards is away from direct building by the government to building by the private sector on government-owned land and using government financing for the homeowners. So this is the PPP model that is for housing for citizens. Now, when it comes to housing for non-citizens, there is a kind of an indirect PPP model, if you want. It's where the government is more providing the ecosystem for the private sector to deliver housing, affordable housing. So the government has been providing serviced and cheaper land, a bit. Dubai is expanding, so that's a bit on the like further away from the city center, but still very accessible with infrastructure, with transportation options. The metro is here, so it's serviced. The government regulates rental markets to prevent very high rental increases. So there's a cap on how much owners can increase the rent. This is the rental increase cap. And in general, it regulates the rental market in terms of how the brokers work, how the contracts are, etc. And it sets standards for accommodation. So for labor accommodation, which usually gets a lot of negative press from this region, but I have to say that the UAE has really progressed a lot on that front with setting labor standards for labor accommodation and for low-income accommodation in general. So this is, I have here some images. So this is some of the projects that we as AECOM have worked on. So this is a housing for citizens. So again, land provided by the government, built by the private sector with financing for homeowners from the government. And so these are like big, massive projects that are only for citizens in different emirates in Dubai. We've also worked on the housing guidelines to provide guidance for builders and developers of these communities to make sure they meet the vision of the government. Now, private sector-led housing, these are some examples of private sector-led affordable housing in the UAE. And I have to say that it is, compared to other regions that I've worked on, it is definitely of a higher standard in terms of quality and amenities that are accessible to these to residents of affordable housing in the UAE. And there are some new concepts when it comes to affordable housing. So this is a new concept. It's a co-living concept that's proving to be very successful, where you have professionals. They own like a small unit you see here on the left, and then all the services, including a bigger kitchen and amenities, are communal. This is again facilitated by the government because they had to change some of the requirements, some of the building requirements, some of the zoning requirements to allow this new concepts to happen, but it's happening and it's proven to be very successful. And as AECOM, we're working on standardizing. We're working a bit on the construction side to standardize the process to make it again more efficient to deliver this type of affordable housing through more efficient design for manufacturing and assembly. So these are all very good things, in my opinion, and from what I've seen as a profession and as a resident of this country, the supply of affordable housing has definitely increased. The standard is very high compared to other regions, but there's still something missing. What is missing? Some of the elements that are missing are also, they have to do with the way the UAE has developed, with the way cities in this country have developed very quickly and very rapidly. So it's still a maturing place. So some of the things that I have seen in other places and other countries that I have lived in, such as the US or Europe, are still missing here. So affordable housing is still thought of as a product for the private sector. So they are thinking, okay, what is the product that we can deliver that meets this requirement or fills this gap, which is very good, but it is in many ways short-lived. because we've seen projects that start out as affordable housing, but then they become expensive with time. So we don't have this kind of security that I've seen in other countries where you have mission-driven developers who are interested in protecting affordable housing in perpetuity. So that's a missing element. And the fourth P, which I think the next speaker will focus on, the element of the community involvement. People have stake in their neighborhoods and preserving this, inclusive neighborhoods. Again, these are missing elements, but I believe they will come as the city, again, becomes more mature and less transient, so people will become more vested in their neighborhoods. So I'm going to stop now and hand it over to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maysa. Yes, you've given a really great comments and points about the work that you're doing. Wonderful. Thank you for that. And also provided a nice segue to our next speakers. Puja, over to you. We're very keen to hear about how Habitat for Humanity is trying to bring the fourth P into the mix, and how do we involve the people and the communities in the decision-making process and in these development projects.
Thank you very much. And I'll just share my screen. Just please let me know when you can see the screen. Is it visible?
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right. Thank you so much. And first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this very important panel. And I would also like to thank all the previous speakers, because many of the things that I wanted to say, they've already said it. So I think, it leads into what I'm going to talk about today, especially from the last speaker. So Maysa, thank you very much for leading into it. So usually, as you said, we all know that affordable housing is a big challenge, and it's the same case here also, especially when we're looking at Asia Pacific. So I'm just going to talk a bit more about Pacific. This is a picture from Hong Kong. I'm sure many of our colleagues here might already be aware. This picture keeps coming up, especially when we are discussing about affordable housing per se, and also affordable housing really in the context of countries, especially in Asia Pacific, where land really is a challenge. And we know that in the case, especially here in Asia Pacific and also broadly, the role of private sector is usually seen as providing the finance, when we are talking about affordable housing. We're also looking at the private sector for providing technological or technical support, and also in terms of providing raw materials in some cases, and a lot in case of countries where Habitat works, volunteers from the private sector. So this perspective is perhaps slightly different from what the other panelists provided, but I thought it'll be good to put it up. So when we are working with the private sector as Habitat for Humanity, which is a large non-governmental organization, these are usually the lines along which we work with the private sector. So the previous speakers have spoken a lot about, what's being done by the private sector, how important it is to involve the private sector, and how effective now it is really having the private sectors involved directly in building the houses. But I want to look a little bit beyond that, and as Maysa nicely said, and it ties in with what I'm going to speak about, is that at Habitat for Humanity, we are also really looking at the 4 Ps. This might be new for many of you here, but it is also very important. We should not forget that the people and the communities that we are working with are also a very important player. And forging these kind of partnerships where we are looking beyond the private sector and the public sector contributing to the housing sector, which is how it's usually done, to also listen to the people for whom the houses are being built. It's very, very important. We've had many cases where the government on its own or along with the private sector have constructed housing but they are lying totally empty. And the reason is because the people were not consulted in terms of the facilities they would need, the design of the house that they would require. So they are, especially here in the case of the Asia Pacific, many housing units in various countries. I can speak specifically also for India, since I'm from India, that there are these large government schemes where houses have been built and they're empty. Nobody wants to live in them because they're really not what the people want, a house in which they would like to live at. So it's very important also to look at the perspective from the people. So, what we at Habitat for Humanity are trying to do is to foster partnerships in which we have government, the people, as well as the private sector all coming together to build houses which are socially acceptable and acceptable by the people. And we are talking here not only about large cities, but also smaller towns, because if you look in the case of Asia Pacific, there is a growing trend where even in smaller towns and cities, there is a trend now for people to want to own their own houses, or there is a huge migration from rural areas into urban areas, and there is a need to provide housing. So in those cases, really, with a PPPP as a P4 approach, it really helps in engaging more with the communities, the people, the government, as well as the private sector, to come and work together to build affordable housing, which is acceptable to the people, because they are the ones at the end of the day who are living there. And housing, as we know, is a very complex issue and cannot be addressed solely either by the public sector, here we mean the government, or the private sector. So it is a complex issue which requires more partnerships between the different players. So this is the model that we are working with in Habitat for Humanity, where we are really trying to ensure that there is active involvement from the homeowners or the communities that the houses are being built for, so that the government and the private sector and the communities work collectively together from the very beginning or as early as possible in the projects and the programs that are being implemented, so that there is a greater trust and collectively the problem of affordable housing can be addressed together. So I think that was my last slide. I'll stop here. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Puja. I appreciate it. Very, very interesting to hear about the approach, and yes, I think it's super important that we give the voice to the people who are eventually going to live in those buildings being built. One other element as we are adding piece into the P3, P4. One other consideration as well that I think we all should be mindful of is the planet being the fifth P, that is somebody to whom we cannot give the voice, but should be considered when we design such projects. Thank you to all the panelists. Appreciate all your comments. Now we can move to some open questions that I would like to pose to all four of you. Please feel free to unmute yourself and pick it up as you see fit. Firstly, I'm interested to hear, it has been mentioned a little bit, but if we could kind of pin down the role of the private sector as the sort of a key topic of today's session. So where do you see the role of the private sector, and where perhaps do you see that the private sector is not involved as much, and sort of what are the benefits? Why do we even need the private sector to be involved in the affordable housing? Olivia?
Yeah, I can start with this one. I think the main key of the private sector is that the private sector can access sources of finance that the government can't, and can take on a different type of risk that governments usually can't take. And that's really key here. When we talk about building affordable housing, we usually talk about large scale developments, and private housing is, in most places in the world, a private asset. It's an asset, that is sold from the private sector to households. Affordable housing should not be any different in theory. In practice, unfortunately, it takes a lot of government intervention for it to happen. But minimizing that government intervention kind of enables the government to focus on other things. So if the government can leverage private sector financing, it opens up the government budget to do other things, such as infrastructure investments and all of that. So that's why I think really the private sector is key. We really need to rely on outside sources of finance and also their capacity to take on offtake risk to make this happen, because the government simply does not have, in most countries anyway, the budget to overcome this gap on its own.
Okay, thank you, Olivia. I think you have touched on the point, some of the points that I covered in my presentation. So why do we need the private sector to intervene? And also, what is, I think, we should also not lose sight of the role of the government in an affordable housing program. See, because we are seeking the private sector for what we know. They have the capacity, they have the expertise, they can deliver on time, they can also bring, like, knowledge, financial, like capacity, which the government may lack. And also they have an interest to take risk for remuneration. But we should not, I think Tomas wanted to focus on the private sector, but we should not forget also the role of the public sector in affordable housing. I remember Olivia mentioned some PPP have failed. Why did they fail? Many of you mentioned like provision of land, but it is not naked land. Technically, the government should be able to provide service land. And I saw in Olivia's presentation, PPP in Ivory Coast, I think, project in Ivory Coast in my country, they failed because the government failed to provide service lines to the private developer. So if you don't do that, the private developer, this is not their role, to do the servicing of the land, building like the basic infrastructure. So this is very important. Also, the government need to like work around the selection of, who are the beneficiaries. So we could leverage the government in doing these type of things. So it's very important, not to lose sight of the role of the public here. For instance, if we are dealing with people, low income earners, for instance, the project may not be commercially viable if government does not intervene. So for these type of, earners, most of the time you don't even go for a PPP. Government like try to provide subsidized houses. This is the role at the end of the day, because what is a PPP? Government goes and delegates service that is its responsibility to the private sector. Now, where affordable housing PPP could work, for instance, so you look at the segment middle income, for instance, you can do some cross subsidization. And when you go to the higher income, for instance, you may not even need the government to be there anymore because people earn a lot. Private sector can have some commercial projects, some like high income, target some high income population, so they may not need that. So I wanted to put also things in perspective here, in addition to what Olivia added, which is like what we look into. And also when Puja mentioned the 4P, the people, for instance, yes, before you go and do your PPP, you also need to do some market study to try to see what are the needs. In Djibouti, for instance, we know for sure that the typical household is 6 people, and they don't like the apartment that are 1-bedroom apartment and 1 living room. They shun that off. So if you build that, you will not get anything. So these are the type of things that we want to, to also put here in the discussion. So over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Puja. I'm seeing your hand up.
No, thank you so much, Thomas. Yes, as I said, and we all realize that housing is a very complex issue. And we have to really work together, all of us. So the role of the private sector is also important because primarily the land is provided by the public sector. But the private sector apart from providing finances, also has an important role, at least from the projects that we're working in Habitat, and we've seen our work with the private sector. It's also to provide the technologies, you know, the advancement in making houses. As Thomas, you mentioned, climate change is very important. So, you know, in Habitat, we do have certain programs where we are working with the private sector and looking at how to also promote more energy efficient or more greener houses. So the private sector is also really an important player when it comes to technology and, you know, in housing, more efficient housing construction. So that's also very important. And Jacques, yes, I totally agree that, you know, before any houses are built, it is important that, you know, the background work study is done, you know, the research is done. But it's it was surprising for me too, like how many houses, as I said, how many schemes there are out there, especially here in the Asia Pacific region, where you have these thousands and tens of thousands of houses lying absolutely empty because the people are not consulted, you know. So it's a waste of resources, it's a waste of land. And in some cases, people did move in for sometimes in some projects, but of course, you know, it wasn't what they wanted, and then they abandoned those houses, but they're still standing there. So it is also very important to, you know, do your research well. And one of the best ways really to ensure is to also talk to the homeowners in terms of the kind of houses that they are looking for, so that they will actually live in the houses that are being built for them. So I'll stop there. Thank you, Thomas.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. Great comment and good conversation. My next question, again, to all four of you. What do you see as the key incentives for the private sector to invest and to be involved in affordable housing? Especially, I'm trying to build up on the point that Jacques has mentioned around the sort, you know, low income earners versus whereby you need the government to be involved. But I wonder if there is a sort of a balance between these two worlds, and whether there is a business opportunity, in fact, for the lower income population. Olivia, please.
Yeah, I can start us off. I mean, I think the main thing here is volume, right? This is the greatest untouched market, perhaps on the planet. If I were a developer, and maybe I will be in a future career, this is a huge opportunity if you can get it right. I mean, the housing industry is a huge industry, and there is a globally untapped market for even the middle class. The middle class does not have access to formal, decent housing in most African countries, not to mention lower income households. So in terms of volume, the market is enormous, and you can imagine the profitability that goes with that. Of course, there are many issues in targeting this market, and that's why it hasn't been done mostly until now. And I think PPPs are one of the main keys to unlocking this market. Most countries have the issues developers face is access to land and infrastructure. Land and infrastructure and often finance is a major issue. If governments can help developers unlock those major issues, the opportunity speaks for itself. And I think many developers see that. And I hope respond to Jacques', for example, invitation to work on PPPs together in different countries. So yes, short answer, volume and profitability.
So I think, yeah, just to add to what Olivia said in terms of incentives, it's, yeah, I agree, definitely land and as others have said, not any land, serviced land that is accessible. And it's also really intervening at every case is different, every country is different, every city is different, but like intervening across the value chain of building housing. So it begins with land, serviced land, financing. Then we can talk about zoning. I mean, zoning is also in many places, it's really very restrictive, even in terms of parking requirements, in terms of, so it has many different aspects. And once that zoning becomes more flexible, then there is more incentive for developers to provide affordable housing. So that's also a key issue. And when it comes to the lower income segments where they're not a natural candidate for, or not a natural target market for affordable housing for developers, then here the subsidies from the government become very, very important to make it lucrative, combined with enough volume. So all these elements are critical, but it's doable, and we've seen success stories from different parts of the world.
Okay, thank you, Maysa. So let me also chip in here. Yeah, I like what Olivia and you mentioned, volume, and I will start with volume. You know, some private developers, for instance, for them, size is critical. So if you call them in your country for a PPP, for instance, you also need to show them that, you know, this is not a one shot. As a government, you need to show them that you have a pipeline of projects, you know, that you plan to execute, so that they are interested in coming to, you know, to your market. Now, in terms of, I think other thing, I will show a screen here, but there are also things, something that we call cross subsidy, you know, subsidization, for instance. So we did a PPP in India where the private developer had 2/3 of the land to build the affordable units and hand them back to the government, and 1/3 was for the developer to develop whatever they needed, like commercial or high income. So this also, you know, give the possibility of the private developer to come and earn extra money to finance, you know, the affordable housing unit. Because if it was only affordable housing, it would have been very, very difficult for them to reach a certain level of return. So government needs to be flexible also as to, you know, what they can allow the private sector to do. If you tell them, just come and do affordable housing, you know, and we try to limit things within that framework, it would be very difficult. They should also give them room for creativity, and the cross subsidization is a very good opportunity. So let me share a screen very quickly, less than 1 minute if you don't mind, to show you something. Yeah, do you see that? Do you see the screen?
Yes, we can see that, yes.
Yeah, so I think this, I want to show it maybe 60 seconds for all of us to take a look. We did some analysis and we came up with these, you know, these things that I think that need to be addressed. So there is land with basic infra. There is also like government need to do things. Sometimes we don't expect them. We think, oh, because this is government, so they will do it. Sometimes we spend too much time in like granting permit and approvals, and this could be very time consuming and could even like discourage private operators. Access to construction material, cost, you know, availability. We have also like developers, you know, they come into a market and they are building to cater to the local market. Do they have access, you know, to loans for the constructions, housing loan? This is on the demand side. So the target beneficiary is the allotment. So I really wanted to share this for you to take like a quick look at it. We can even share after the meeting to see also what needs to be addressed. This, I think it also answers the question of what needs to be done, you know, to bring private sector participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacques, and thanks everyone. My probably last question, as we are coming to the end of the session, we talked a little bit about the you know, sort of what are the incentives, the drivers for us to bring in the private sector and bring in there into the affordable housing sector. and we address it from the financial perspective and the return of investment perspective. What are some of the other social factors, or how do we rephrase that? How do we motivate the private sector to consider other social factors beyond the kind of return of investment, the money side of things? How do we get them to consider and what are the social factors that they should be considering? What are the topics that they should be thinking about? I'm having in mind sort of, you know, poverty being one of them, gender another one, safety, access to work, and so on.
Yeah, I think maybe I'll take that one. So, you know, as I mentioned, I work with a private company. We're a private consulting company, and even here in this region now, I showed a slide about the sustainable legacies. We are a publicly listed company, so this emphasis now that we are having on social value is driven, really, it comes from the US, at least for us, because it is becoming kind of something that investors would like to see, that this whole emphasis on ESG and social outcomes and environmental outcomes is becoming more important to investors. And this is where we are seeing change. I mean, I wasn't, you know, we weren't having 3 years ago, we weren't having these conversations within our company about equity and how do we measure social value. And it's all coming from somewhere that is, you know, there is a place where people are recognizing the importance of these things, especially investors, and are requiring that, and they want to put their money in entities that that take these aspects into consideration, which is, you know, a hopeful trend, I would say.
Thank you, Maysa. I appreciate it. And now, as we are really coming to the end, we only have two more minutes left to go. I'd like to give the opportunity to each of you to give a final remarks in the order as we have done the initial presentation. So, but please do stay within 30 seconds to one minute. If you have some, if you don't, no pressure. So, Olivia, would you like to start?
No, just thank you very much for inviting me. I have to drop off now, but. Yeah, I would invite governments and private developers to kind of think more about these opportunities to work together. And, you know, I think it's only by working together that we can really unlock the key to building housing at a mass scale and in a green and sustainable way. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Olivia. Thanks for being with us today.
And
Jack,
yeah,
would you like?
Thank you to the MENA Housing Forum for inviting us, and also thank you to the participants, to the co-panelists. And our role, HfHI PPP Transaction Advisory, is to encourage government, you know, to enter PPPs with government, and we touch many sectors, of which the housing sector. And right now we are working on various initiatives. So I encourage you to reach out, and I think to have some conversation, to share some thoughts. And this project that we are working on will be like market advertised soon. So you will have the opportunity, you know, to chip in. And if you're interested, you can also reach out to us. Thanks again.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks for being with us and sharing your knowledge and experience. Maysa, any last comments from your side?
Not really. Again, thank you so much for this opportunity. It's a topic that, you know, it's never gets boring. It's always so important, so exciting, and there's always new things. I missed some of the presentations, but I look forward to catching up on what I've missed, basically. Thank you. Thanks again.
Thanks, Maysa. Thanks for being with us and sharing your view. Puja, over to you.
Yes, I would also like to really thank for having this opportunity to be part of this panel, and just want to reiterate again that we all know how complex an issue affordable housing is. The private sector has a very crucial role to play, but at the same time, we should also remember the equally important role that the public sector has to play, and also the homeowners. So there really is a need for all of us to work together to tackle this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Puja. Likewise, and thanks to all of you for sharing your knowledge and views and perspective on this important topic. I guess we could go on for a long time beyond this, but unfortunately we are limited. And thanks to all the participants and all the audience and people listening into the conversation. And we're hope that you enjoy the further sessions coming up. I believe we are going to hear from the National Housing Forum, the conclusions from the National Housing Forums that Habitat has organized over the last few weeks in Lebanon, Jordan, and Egypt. So please enjoy the next session. Thanks, everyone. Thanks so much, everyone, for being with us today.
Thank you. And
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks. Bye-bye.